while I had just turned 8 years old, and my mum was left alone with me and my 2 younger brothers. It happened during this, he was only 37, and it happened during the school holidays. So I remember having to go into school later in the day because the teacher had to tell my class, Stuart's dad has died, nobody mention it to him. And that was what was dealt with. So even the teachers and the children, nobody knew what to say. My friend had told me what the meeting was about and what they'd said. But actually nobody discussed it. And if I misbehaved, it was put down to, oh, he's lost his dad, don't say anything. Or how can we leave Stuart out? Or if something went right or wrong, nobody knew how to deal with it, from the teachers to the students. So it was almost as though the event had never happened. And actually, through other circumstances, I have spoke in the main chamber, the impact this had on me, and it took me many years to even deal with it myself. Whereas if I had had this education and awareness, and it can be spoken openly, it would... I will do.
Thank you for giving away, Honourable Member. My experience is working as a mental health nurse in the NHS for many years, and seen many people struggle through their mental health due to some of these traumatic experiences, bereavement in the family that that happened many years ago, and they were never able to deal with it. So would the member agree with me that not addressing some of these traumatic episodes in the younger age can lead to long-term damage to their mental health in the later on in their life?
The Honourable Member raises an excellent point. I 100% agree, but it's not always one significant point. So for me, I lost my dad at 8. I got shot at 17 in the military. And what I had was a culmination of different things. And I've spoke openly of how I ended up with PTSD, with all these contributing factors, and spent 15 years living in a nightmare, wanting to take my own life. So all these things had built up. But if we had dealt with this earlier, children's mental health, it's hard. It is really hard to deal with it. But actually, there is a way to coming through that. And the way is to grieve at the time and to talk and discuss it. And I don't think the weight should just be on the parents. It should be on the school to support and work with them, because the children are at school for so long. And I know it's not just myself and John and others in this room who have commented. I also know this is across South Shropshire, who we've almost got 2,000 signatures in this. In the old constituency, it was Ludlow, is now South Shropshire. So I know how important it is locally. And I think that's single-handed credit to the awareness that John has been raising for that. And as we're here today to speak of these experiences, I know the last government launched a review whether the content for bereavement is needed in the statutory guidance, and pledged to consider the points raised as the petition a part of it. The consultation ran to the 11th of July. We had a general election, and that was called before the consultation is finished. But I'm asking the Minister today if they can take up the work that was started, look at putting this into the national curriculum, seeing that other children, when they do face this, because they will face this, they can have the support. People will know from other children in the class to teach us how to deal with this. It is not resource intense. It could be put alongside RHSE or something similar. It is not a financial burden, but actually the time spent investing in the children, as the Honourable Member mentioned early on, will save far more time in dealing with the problems further down the line. So having personally experienced this, having been so inspired by the work that John's done for all these years, to be a voice not just in the UK but internationally on such a hard and difficult subject, but putting it into the right context, I fully support what John is doing and ask the Minister to align with me and look where we can put this back into the national curriculum and honour the work that John has done on behalf of losing his mother Maria all those years ago. Thank you, Mrs Harris.
Stella Creasy. There we go. Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair this afternoon, and it's a privilege to be part of a debate which I think reflects Parliament and politics at its best, which is when we see the injustices and the suffering that has befallen those who we represent, we seek to make sure it never happens again. Can I start by paying tribute not just to the member from Stevenage for so eloquently opening the debate, but actually to Mark and John and indeed the member from Shropshire. It doesn't make it easier when time passes. It makes it more important that we haven't yet dealt with the situation that you are in. And I am grateful to have heard your experiences and to be able to contribute to a debate where your experiences are at the centre of it. And I think we are speaking for thousands of people in this country of all ages who have had this happen to them, to lose a parent. What I want to do in just a very short contribution is raise with the Minister some of the examples that as a constituency MP I have dealt with, which are the cases nobody ever wants to see, because so often when a young child comes through your door in this position, it takes all the courage not to burst into tears to hear their story, because it is so heartbreaking. And yet it becomes even more of a challenge when you realise that services aren't actually built to wrap around them, where actually the thing that seems so obvious, that of course this awful thing has happened to this young person, we must do everything for them, is not a given. Let me explain to the Minister what I mean. I have very sadly dealt with a number of children who've lost their parents. I've dealt with children who've lost their parents to murder, as indeed Mark's father was lost. Horrific public murders in my local community. It would seem obvious that that child would be traumatised. One child, in fact, was there when it happened, and yet we are still struggling to get that child counselling. It's not a given. It's not something that the school really has any understanding that needs to be provided. Doesn't mean the school doesn't want to help. It's so out of their worldview that this could happen that it's not something that is in place. The family have been trying to push for it for some time. It's still a work in progress, and yet it seems obvious to me, because actually, ironically, what we've now discovered is if a child views a murder and indeed is a witness, they can get counselling, but not actually if it's just it happened to a member of their family and indeed to a parent. So I hope that we can, when we take this petition and what it's telling us about the need to recognise that children are traumatised in this way, but they're traumatised by the loss of a parent, whether they see it or not, that we get counselling in, because actually that seems so obvious and yet it's not consistent. And the counselling services are there, so it's a question of joining up, and I hope the Minister can take that back for her department. I also saw that with children who lost parents to terminal illnesses, that again, it wasn't an expected part of the conversation about what we could do only when it came to whether or not we could keep the child in school. And yet that seems too late along in the conversation. And I'll wager the member from Shropshire, in his experience, feels that one of the reasons he got to that point was that nobody intervened early enough. Indeed, they tried to stop the conversation rather than to recognise how traumatic it would be with him. So not just providing counselling when something horrific has happened, but actually recognising how horrific it is to lose a parent at such a young age, full stop, I think would make a real difference. The other... Oh, absolutely.
The honourable, right honourable member raises an excellent point there, and even in the MOD now, the UK Armed Forces has recognised that an annual MOT on mental health to discuss death, dying and bereavement and what that impact is getting far more performance out of soldiers who are going to face this. So why on earth would we not do it for schools, to get that on earlier on? And she raises that brilliant point.
I thank the member. I also think one of the reasons it's important we do this in schools is because when I think of the partners who have lost somebody who I have been working with, absolutely what you want to do is try and take as many different burdens off their shoulders as possible and recognise that they are dealing with grief too. Obviously, this is very focused on the children, but I do think there is something also about how we join up the welfare system to support families. They've lost somebody, they've lost an income provider. For the parent, often the time they want to be there with their child is taken away because they have to work to try and make up the loss of income. And again, it just feels like something where we should be able to join things up. I first got involved in many of these issues working with the brilliant widowed and young, looking at parents who were not married and the impact that would mean that families would lose an income provider that wasn't recognised. But the children were clearly suffering too. It's just that the mums in those cases, and indeed in one case the dad, were having to think about all the practical things like the bills and how to keep a roof above their head, and they didn't have as much time to be with their children, and that in itself was causing grief and harm to them too. Now, we did manage to get bereaved widows allowance extended to non-married partners, but we didn't really look at whether 18 months and the idea that somehow after 18 months a child and a family should have recovered enough that there would be no impact challenged. And I think that that does impact on our ability to help children. The one other scenario I want to raise with the Minister, it's something I actually feel it goes to the first petition about data, because it was something that really floored me. I recently had a case of 2 children who lost their mother and then shortly afterwards lost their father. I mean, that was just extraordinary to me, because it meant we were reliant on family members to be able to help them, and because those family members didn't have immigration status here in the UK, those children who were British citizens lost all their rights and were living in absolute abject poverty. I mean, my community in Walthamstow brilliantly picked them up to try and help them whilst we resolved their immigration status. But the children who had rights here, those children's rights were gone as soon as their parents had died. And it got me thinking, well, how many other families might be in this position? And so I asked the Ministry of Justice about children who have legal guardians, because that was what these family members had come to be for these children, and it was sorting out their status that then opened up doors for the children. That took far too long. It took over a year to sort out. But actually, we don't, as a record, know how many orphans there are in this country. Think about it for a moment. The worst thing that could possibly happen, you lose one parent and then you lose a second, or maybe even you lose both of them together. The state doesn't actually know how many of those there are. So I asked the Ministry of Justice about the numbers of children being allocated a legal guardian because both parents had passed away. And the Minister of Justice told me in a parliamentary question that whilst they thought that information was held in court records, it wasn't something that was uniformly gathered. That means the Minister's job is doubly difficult, because she won't know how many children would be in a position where there is literally no guaranteed guardian for a child to be able to pick any of these issues up, whether it's the counselling, whether it's their financial position. It just seems such an obvious thing that we ought to, as corporate parents, know how many children are in that position where sadly they've lost both parents. So if I can make a plea, both that we make counselling a given, not something that has to be asked and fought for and sought out, and hopefully you get a Member of Parliament who might know about victim support, or hopefully you might know about a charity, much as those brilliant charities do things, that we do that for every child who loses a parent, and we organise it through the schools, partly to be able to help take some of the weight for the parent who might be grieving. We also start to act as corporate parents, and we record just how many orphans there are. I would hope that that number is infinitesimal, but the 2 that I came across in Walthamstow, I've never felt more impotent, frankly, as an MP about what I could do to stop those children living in a horrific circumstance where they lost all support, all funding, all assistance, where we as a community were having to gather together school uniform with them, and the food banks were having to be there every single day. I would be horrified if there were more children in that position, but the fact that we don't know says we have to do more in terms of the basic data to understand what's happening to some children in this country. We hope this is a scenario that we never have to deal with. We sadly know it isn't the case. That is why it's so important, this place at its best. It hears the stories, it sees the reality of the messiness of human life, and it acts. And what these petitions do is they call us to act on scenarios that sadly we know happen more than we might realise, but we don't actually know the full extent of. And I know the Minister will share my concern and my compassion for people in that position and want to do all that she can. If we can help her in lobbying her colleagues in the Department for Work and Pensions, in the Ministry of Justice, so that she has a better data set of those children in that position, I know that is a view that we will hold across the House. And I thank the member from Stevenage for bringing the petition so eloquently so that we can do that.
Caroline Foden.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's an honour to speak under your chairmanship, and thank you to the member for Stevenage for opening this debate. And I'd just like to acknowledge all the people who have signed the petition, and Mark and John for all their work. I'm looking along the row, I'm not exactly sure where you are. It's good to see you. So I rise to speak in this debate as someone who unfortunately has very personal experience of the issue that we are debating today. 22 years ago now, my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer when my daughter was 2 and our baby was just 5 months old. He died a year later, a week before Ellie's 4th birthday, and Laura was just 17 months old. So they are now brilliant, brilliant young women, and I'm extremely proud of them. But it's been a long journey, and I can say from the bottom of my heart that grief lasts a lifetime, that bereavement issues, they come and they go, and they change as the children grow up. You know, the grief is quite strange when you're 3. You don't know where Daddy's gone. When you're 17 months and you can't even speak, I think she could just about say Daddy, but, you know, well, she was babbling a bit, but, you know, it's very, very difficult to explain at that age. So you then have to go through and explain again and again and again at different stages of life as they grow up. You know, one of the things that you read about in books, but which is actually true, is that for bereaved children, it's an issue that keeps coming back. So they'll be okay for a few years, and then they'll move schools, and suddenly it starts all over again. And I remember when both of them started secondary school, there was a conversation about what do I say? Do I go in and say on day 1, oh, my dad's dead, or do I keep it quiet? You know, and you know, I did remarry many years later, and then there was a question about, do I call him Stuart, or do I just say he's Dad to my friends? You know, and the girls used to just refer to us as our parents, because it was easier, because they didn't want to have to keep explaining. So one of the things that was very, very difficult was retelling the story at school over and over again. So Ellie started school 6 months after her dad died. And I had some brilliant friends who came to the house on day 1, and we all went together to start school, because I knew that she would be one of the only kids there who didn't have mum and dad at the school gate on day 1. And it was like that every time. Every school carol concert, every play, every parents' evening, every sports day, for years, feeling like there should have been someone else there who wasn't. And one of the things that was really hard was that the school didn't seem to it felt like every year I had to tell the class teacher, and it wasn't a whole school experience. So I had to keep retelling and re-explaining. And when they went to secondary school and had lots of different classes with lots of different teachers, it's really quite something that if things are difficult, that you then have to keep explaining it again and again. So you know, I just think this petition is so important. Maybe things have changed a bit in the last 21 years, but I think the fact that no national data is collected is a sign that this is an issue that we still really haven't got to grips with. The Childhood Bereavement Network estimates that more than 46,000 children in the UK experience the death of a parent every year. So that's 127 children that are going through this every single day. And we collect data on so many aspects of our children's lives, from school performance to health statistics, even the number of children affected by divorce. But when it comes to bereavement, these children are invisible in terms of policy, planning and support. And it absolutely has to change. Bereavement is one of the most difficult experiences any child can face, yet we've got no clear plan or pathway to support these children. The impact of bereavement, we know, is lifelong and can present emotional and psychological challenges. And I do remember phoning Winston's Wish more than once as a parent to ask for some advice when things were kicking off and not going very well. And they were absolutely brilliant. And shortly after, about a year after Nick died, we joined the Widowed and Young Foundation. And I eventually went on to chair Widowed and Young for a couple of years. It's an absolutely brilliant organisation, and I couldn't have survived without it. And I remember in the car, we used to go away for weekends with Way, and I had lots of friends who all had small kids. And I do remember in the back of the car one day, the kids chattering away, and one of them said to the other, "What's a brain hemorrhage?" And the other one explained, you know, and for them, it was so normal that all their dads had died, and they just talked about it. And it was so important for them to be able to sort of connect with other children who had experienced the same thing and who they felt able to talk to. Yet at school, it wasn't part of the conversation. Their friends didn't know how to talk about it. They didn't really understand. You know, my daughters have often said, "Oh, my friends never mention it. They never talk about it." You know, it's just kind of brushed under the carpet because they feel awkward. So, you know, I do think having it on the curriculum, we don't talk about death enough in this country. I mean, we've talked about it a lot in this House over the last couple of weeks. But I think Friday's debate was also, you know, an indication that we really don't have these conversations in Britain. We feel very awkward about it. And I think it's really important that it becomes much more of a normal thing to discuss. So I'm going all over the place here. I'm just going to go back to the bit about data, which I've got written down here. If registrars were required to ask about the number of dependent children at the point a death is registered, we could at least begin to understand the true scale of the issue. And then local authorities would be able to use this data to make informed decisions about the resources required to support grieving families in their area. And nationally, it would help make the case for a coordinated response to childhood bereavement and ensure that bereaved children get the support they need. And I believe that registrars at that point could also signpost people to useful organisations if they knew that there were children there. Because believe me, as a bereaved parent, you need all the help you can get, and to know that there are people out there who understand is really, really important. The collection of data would also identify children who are not receiving support and would allow local services to monitor whether the services available are meeting the needs of bereaved children and whether enough children are receiving the help they need. And it would allow us to ask the important questions: are our systems reaching these children, and are they getting the right kind of help? Without this data, we cannot ensure that our services are meeting the scale of the need. And just to turn briefly to the issue of educating children, we can't expect children to process such a significant loss on their own, and we can't expect teachers to navigate these issues without proper training and support. And there are organisations, as the Honourable Member for Walthamstow said, a lot of this stuff has already been done. The resources are there to support teachers, but just giving children a space to understand what death means, what it is, what it's all about, is an opportunity for a bereaved child not to feel quite so alone and different. Children need to be able to express their grief and be supported in doing so, and teachers need to feel empowered to address this difficult subject, ensuring that grieving children do not feel isolated or misunderstood. If such education were part of the curriculum, we could ensure teachers and support staff have the tools and knowledge they need to support children at the most difficult time in their lives. Grieving children need to feel safe, understood and supported. The impact of losing a parent can be devastating. It affects every aspect of a child's life for a lifetime. And without understanding the scale of the issue, without having the right data and the right systems in place, we are leaving bereaved children to navigate this experience with little support and leaving their parents to do a really difficult job on their own without the wider support network that they need. It's time we recognise the needs of bereaved children, and I would urge the Minister to see what we can do as fast as we can do it so that more children get the support they need. Thank you.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This is something like the 5th debate I've taken part in on this subject since I became an MP in 2017. And it's more than 2 years since I asked the then Leader of the House if we could have a debate on it and if we could look at it. And during those 2.5 years, I have repeatedly asked the government to look at a register for bereaved children because it was suggested to me by Winston's wish. And the reason was that I first became, if you like, aware and thought about it in a conversation with my sister over lunch. My sister, who's now 50, said to me, "Do you remember how when Dad died, when she was 8, that we never really saw anybody from social services? Nobody came to see us, nothing happened." I said, "Yeah, that's right." She said, "Because we'd never been in contact with social services. They didn't think we needed them." Do you know it's still the same? Because I think a friend's partner had died, and Di realised that nothing had changed in 40 years. And I thought, that's ridiculous. And I spoke to Winston's Wish, and they said, yeah, the problem is that we know how many children are bereaved every year. We know that they are out there, and we have the support networks to help them. We have the facilities. We have peers that they can talk to, like the Honourable Member said, who will appreciate it. But the charities and the organisations don't know how to get in touch with the children because it's not recorded where they are. And the families don't know how to get in touch with the support networks, because no one says when they go to record a death, do you need help for a child? Now, it should be simple. That is why I think the petition calling for a record is the best way forward. Teaching, to turn to the other subject briefly, teaching about bereavement and loss in school, I think, is vital. And I think that is the role that schools have played. But with respect to the former government, they seem to think that it should only be the schools that had the responsibility. I don't think that is what children want. I don't think that's what their parents want. Children who've lost a parent or a grandparent or a friend's parent or a sibling, they need help at times when the school is not available. They need help at night when they're lonely or upset. They need help when they're a teenager and they don't know who to turn to for advice. That's when they need their peers. They often don't want to talk to the school, or they might move school and not know very many people. So I think the idea of a register, a simple box-ticking exercise when a death is recorded that says there is a child who may be affected by this, and then the paperwork handed out, the leaflet, the contact. It wouldn't mean letting that data be public. There would never have to be any publication of that data. It would simply be putting people who needed the help in touch with the people who can offer the help. If we don't do it, then we do face the situation that the Honourable Member talked about. We have adults who go through a traumatic experience as a child and never get the help they need to fully get over it. It comes back when they're adults. That can get them involved in crime, in drugs, have difficulty forming personal relationships. When I spoke to one of the charities involved, Adults Bereaved as Children, one of their psychologists said to me, you do realise you could be opening a whole can of worms for yourself, that you might not have dealt with this quite as well as you thought you did. I think she's wrong, but you never know. But it does come back in later life. It leads to contributions to the burden on the NHS, to problems in the economy. So if we're not going to just look at the huge moral and compassionate case for having this register, we should look at the economic one and see that it does back up that moral and compassionate case. So I thank the Honourable Member for the way he introduced the petition, both petitions, and I would say to the Government, please, before my private member's bill comes before you in July, could we come up with a way of doing this that saves going through any more long-term pain for so many children in this country? The help is there for them. Charities like Winston's Wish want to help them. They just don't know where they are. Thank you.
Lib Dem spokesperson Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Stevenage for opening this debate so eloquently and for representing the views of many people who are here today in the gallery. Thank you to Mark and to John for allowing your experiences to be shared today and for your campaigning on this incredibly important issue. And I also want to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for South Shropshire and my honourable friend for South Devon for speaking so bravely about their personal experiences. It's never easy to talk about your personal experience in this place, but particularly when you're talking about the death of a loved one, a parent or a spouse. It's incredibly difficult, and it's a privilege to hear your story, so thank you for that. Madam Chair, it's estimated that in the UK a child loses a parent every 20 minutes or so, and in that moment a child's life is changed forever. Now that estimate doesn't actually include other losses, such as the loss of a sibling or a grandparent, and these losses of course can be equally painful. And indeed I think back to the time of the COVID pandemic and talking to teachers and head teachers in schools in my constituency, and they were dealing with an awful lot of grief where children were losing relatives who they were close to, and how they were having to cope with that grief in the school setting. And as we've heard today, there's very little data collected on children suffering from such a loss, and I'll come back to that in more detail. Losing a loved one is devastating, no matter what age you are. However, particularly when you're young, still growing, and perhaps, as we've heard, you don't properly understand the concept of death, grief can be especially difficult to manage. And bereavement can have an impact on every aspect of a child's life, including their well-being, their education, and overall life outcomes. And for this reason, as we've heard today, it's absolutely critical that children get the practical and emotional support that they so desperately need. Now, unfortunately, as we've heard today, that's not currently the case for all children. And as I mentioned, there's no official statistics on the number of children who've been bereaved. So, as my honourable friend for Edinburgh West has said, we don't know how many children there are, we don't know where they live, and it's important that both local and national services are aware of the scale of the problem and are able to identify the children that need our support. And so, like those who've signed today's petition and those who've spoken in today's debate, the Liberal Democrats certainly would like to see the establishment of a national register for bereaved children. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend for Edinburgh West for all her campaigning on this issue. Because so many children are slipping through the net. And there are some schools which are providing the support that pupils need. And actually, as we've been talking, I was just reminded, it's 30 years ago actually, almost to the month, that a girl in my class at school was killed with her family in a car crash. And 30 years ago, I remember we came back after the Christmas holidays because they were killed while they were on holiday. Actually, our class teacher brought us all together to have a conversation about it. And I think back now, and I think how important that was. And I know that the school continued to work wherever possible with those girls who were closest to the girl who'd lost her life. But I know that, and as we've heard from the stories today from other honourable members, that certainly isn't the case universally. And it's important that we recognise those schools that do that work. Yet so many do not. And the fact that there's no national mandate from the Department for Education for schools to have a bereavement policy in place, nor any national policy to support schools with this, I think that needs to be rectified. And I hope the Schools Minister will take that away to her department. As we've heard today, there are a number of national and local charities who are trying to fill the gaps and support children and their families through this grief. But that does mean that lots of children are not being matched up with the organisations that could be providing them with support. And families are left scrambling. As we've heard, it's a difficult time. Other family members, parents are trying to deal with grief. It's a stressful period. And so that's why my honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh West, her campaigning on this issue, her private member's bill for a legal duty for children to be informed of the support available to them following a loss is so important. And I hope the Minister will take her up on her offer to get this sorted before she has to bring it forward to the House yet again. These changes would help ensure that there is better join-up and the correct support available as soon as it's needed. And even though every child may not necessarily choose to take up the support or feel that they need to take up the support, it would still provide a much-needed safety net. Now, although we don't have the data to know for certain, it's estimated that 1 in 29 children and young people have lost a parent or sibling. That's almost one child in every classroom. And every child will be affected differently. And we know, as we've heard today, that many will struggle with their mental health as a result of this loss. Grief is messy and complicated, Madam Chair. It doesn't go away, and as we've heard today, it can affect children at different stages of their life. Studies show that some children may have a seemingly mild reaction following a loss. However, really, they struggle in subsequent years as the reality sinks in. And that's why it's so important that mental health support is available continually for bereaved children, not just immediately following their loss. So I agree with the points made by the Honourable Member for Walthamstow about ensuring that there is specialist bereavement counselling available for children, But one of the reasons why the Liberal Democrats have been campaigning for years now for there to be a dedicated mental health practitioner in every primary and secondary school is so that all children, including those who've been bereaved, have got access to mental health support, and also having community hubs that are available for children and young people right up to the age of 25, meaning that young people can go and access support as and when they need it on their own terms. Not only do families face significant emotional challenges after a loss, but they may also face a financial one. Overnight, a household income can shrink by half or potentially even more if the person who died was the main breadwinner in the family. Alongside grieving for your partner, many widowed people suddenly have to figure out how to pay their household bills, their childcare costs, or put food on the table with a sudden loss of income. Bereavement support payments can be a lifeline for families during this time, providing a source of income for families that may not have been found elsewhere. However, in 2017, the previous government cut funding for those payments by around 50%. And especially in the context of a cost of living crisis, these cuts have been devastating to many families suffering a loss. According to the Child Bereavement Network, over 75% of families are now worse off than they would have been under the previous arrangements, with some going into debt and poverty as a result. And that's why the Liberal Democrats have said, and we've campaigned for some time, to double the funding for bereavement support payments. And we'd use the extra funding not just to increase the size of the payments, but also extend the period of time in which families receive them, giving those suffering from loss much needed stability. And I'm very proud that my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, who's also talked very openly about his loss as a child. First, he lost his father as a child, and then he nursed his mum as she died of cancer in his teenage years. He's campaigned so vociferously on this issue, and I'm very pleased he worked with other members and honourable members to pressure the previous government to extend bereavement support payment to cohabiting couples. Would the honourable member give way? I'm very happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I'd just like to add my voice to the calls for extending bereavement support payments. So obviously I was very lucky because I was bereaved before those changes were made, and I had bereavement support payments for quite a long time. There's a couple of things I'd just like to say on that. The reason you get bereavement support payment is because the partner who died has paid national insurance contributions. So my husband spent 20 years paying national insurance contributions. He was never going to get a pension. So to get some kind of payment as a bereaved parent, I think is only just, because the state is never going to be paying out that pension later on. But also, as I've previously said, grief doesn't just stop after 18 months. And as a bereaved parent of young children, you are left to pick up the pieces, to look after your children and to go back to work because you've lost an income, quite often the main income of the family. Now, it's really important for the state of the NHS, for our economy and everything, that a bereaved parent can be as balanced and stable as possible so that their children can remain balanced and stable. It's good for the family, it's good for society as a whole. And the more help you can give a parent to perhaps work part-time so that they can be more available to their bereaved children, the better. Sorry, that was too long. Excuse me, Chair.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that intervention? And she puts far more powerfully than anything I could say in my speech. So I urge the Schools Minister to listen to my honourable friend. And I hope that she and her fellow ministers in other departments will look at increasing the funding for bereavement support, at the very least looking at uprating it because it's depreciated hugely in recent years, but also increasing the time period over which it is paid. As we've heard how important it is, and we're talking about a small number of children. I know that finances are stretched, but we are talking about children who have experienced the most horrendous loss. The implications of a loss can be especially complicated for certain families, especially single-parent families where the caring parent dies. The loss of a parent or guardian can often leave children with no one to look after them, and as a result, family members may step up overnight to take care of them. And this particular situation accounts for almost 1 in 10 children living in kinship care. Such was the case for my constituent April, and I call her that to anonymise her. She suddenly became a kinship carer for her nephew. He had no one else to look after him after his mum passed away from cancer, and his stepfather left the family shortly after his mum's diagnosis. April stepped up to provide a caring and loving home to her nephew at the council's request at very short notice, but this came at great personal cost to herself and her family. Now, the Schools Minister will be aware I've long been campaigning on the issue of kinship carers and making sure that they have the right support. And kinship carers such as April will do their utmost best to look after their children, the children in their care, but they do often need additional support due to sudden changes in their living arrangements and often the traumatic circumstances around this change. And whilst these children need support, too many simply can't access it. This includes better access to therapeutic support, but also things like Pupil Premium Plus funding to be extended for kinship children on a par with looked after children, so that they get the support and the wraparound care both inside and outside of school that they desperately need. Unfortunately, too many kinship carers are desperately trying to get their children support, and to no avail. And this impacts not just the children, but the carers too. Talking about her family's experience, kinship carer Livette said, "When my daughter passed away, all I could focus on was keeping the children emotionally stable. Losing their mother was a traumatic experience for them, and I wanted to make sure they were able to grieve. I wasn't able to find time to grieve myself." Madam Chair, no one should have to feel this way after the loss of a loved one, and whilst we can't take away a child's pain and grief, we owe it to them as a society to do all we can to provide emotional, practical and financial support, and that starts with having a register, with making sure that schools have got policies in place for addressing the curriculum so that we are teaching about grief and bereavement in an age-appropriate and sensitive way, and it also starts with addressing the financial support or lack thereof. It's crucial that we give these children in difficult circumstances the best possible chance to overcome their challenges and to thrive, and I hope this government will implement the changes that I and many others have outlined today. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to start also by thanking Mark and Winston Swish for their work with bereaved children and all the help in a practical way that they provide. And likewise, John Adams, trying to make something good come out of something absolutely terrible. And I should also start by thanking all the people who signed the petitions that have brought about this very, very important and sobering debate today. And when we think about these kind of issues, naturally, of course, we all think about people that we know who are either going through or have been through these terrible bereavements. I think of family friends of ours who have two boys, same age as our children, and they are dealing with the loss of a wife and a mother, and they all deserve a medal just for getting through the day. And we also think about some of the ways that people come through the adversity of these situations. I think about a friend whose life is really shaped by the loss of a father at a young age, and who's really made his life more extraordinary. He's become a wonderful, very, very strong person as a result of that early terrible experience. And we heard some more of those examples, even this debate, even from colleagues in the room. The Right Honourable Lady for South Devon told incredibly open and compelling story about her own experiences. She's been there, and she's again trying to take those terrible experiences and make something good come about as a result of them. And my honourable friend from South Shropshire, who had an extraordinary life in lots of ways and is an incredible person in lots of ways, again taking a very hard thing and making something good of it. And I'd pay tribute to all the other members who've taken part in this important debate today. The member for Stevenage did a brilliant job of setting out the situation. And the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow, I thought, raised some really, really compelling points, particularly about the joining up of data. Likewise, Honourable members have taken part from Edinburgh West and Twickenham and Ashford. Really, really important speeches today. Now, to provide a bit of a sense of hope in this debate, I thought I'd mention some of the things and some of the changes that did happen over recent years. And they started with the 2017 Green Paper on children and young people's mental health. which set in train the start of more support in schools. And it started with the offer to every state school in England to have a senior mental health lead and a grant that they got to have that mental health lead to start the process of improving mental health support in our schools. And that was then built on in more recent years by the rolling out of mental health support teams in schools and colleges in England, helping more young people access that incredibly important support. And when we left office, we got to about 400 mental health support teams in place in schools and colleges across England, and I know the current government want to continue to roll that support more widely. And I remember from my time as a health minister the way we were changing the treatment of mental health. First, the commitment to give it parity of esteem with physical health, then the mental health service standards, and then a 50% increase in the amount of money that we spend on it between 2018 and now. Now, I don't take away from the fact that the demand is ever growing. There is still unmet need out there. But one of the important things that comes from this debate, of course, is that the resource is of no use unless we can connect it to the young people in need. And the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow gave incredibly powerful examples of children who've literally seen their parents murdered, and yet it seems the most obvious thing in the world that support would swing into action at that point, but it doesn't, because we don't have that joined-up approach to data. Now, this is something that the last government was working on from 2016. There was ongoing efforts to try and build a unique child identifier, and I know that the current government, this is not something we have any ideological disagreement about, wants to finish that work and give us a joined-up approach to this. And through the private members' bill of the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh West, we have the opportunity, the department has the exciting opportunity of primary legislation, if it's needed, to make some of these things happen. So we can start to bring together some of the things which seem so obvious that they should happen, and to bring together the knowledge that is dispersed through different bits of the public sector in our schools, in our coroners and so on and so forth, into a proper structured approach to help young people who are going through a hellish situation. So I pay tribute to the people who signed the petitions to make this debate happen. I pay tribute to all the people, some of whom are here today, who have worked on this for many years to provide transformative help, and who have excellent ideas, which I know that the government will want to take up, and we will support all of them and the government too in the process of doing just that.
Minister Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for Stevenage for introducing this very timely debate on an incredibly important subject, as we are in National Grief Awareness Week. And it really is an honour to respond to my first Petitions Committee debate, a committee I formerly chaired, but now from the position of a government minister with responsibility for some of the issues that this petition raises. I have great respect for the work of the Petitions Committee and its importance in giving voice to people from across the country, from across the political spectrum, to provide these opportunities for important issues to be debated, and to be debated in a really respectful way. And I thank all honourable members who have contributed to today's debate, particularly those who have shared so openly and powerfully about their own experiences of dealing with bereavement. I want to also state my deep admiration and thanks to Mark Lemon for his tireless work to support children and families going through bereavement, including his work as an ambassador for Winston's Wish, and his tireless efforts to ensure that the difficult conversation on bereavement can be helpful, can be open, can be constructive, and that it has brought about the discussion that we are having today, because bereavement really is something that touches everyone, but its impact is unique to everyone. It cannot be avoided, and indeed it should not be. And I agree, it is absolutely crucial that those affected by bereavement receive the support that they need throughout their period of bereavement. And it's particularly important for children and young people who lose someone close to them, because it can have a profound impact on children and young people, and it can affect their long-term health and well-being, particularly if left unaddressed. I've unfortunately seen and experienced the challenge that childhood bereavement can present
firsthand, and I know how important it can be to have that right support available in a timely way, and that if it is not processed or given the space or the time to process it, as so passionately and eloquently described by honourable members today, the Honourable Member for South Shropshire and the Honourable Member for South Devon. It's incredibly, many say brave, but I say it's a real gift to share such powerful and personal testimony, because not only does it give such a strong voice to the issues that we are debating today, but it will also be of immense help to others going through similar experiences, to hear from you in this place in such a powerful way. And across society, I agree as well, we all have a role to play in supporting bereaved children and young people. There are so many fantastic charities and community groups, the Childhood Bereavement Network, Hope Again, the Anna Freud Centre, the Ruth Strauss Foundation, to name just 4, but they all play a vital role in supporting, and I want to put on record our thanks for everything that they do. And government has a clear role to play and is committed to improving the support that all young children should be receiving in a variety of difficult and challenging circumstances that they may face. And given my role as Minister for School Standards, I wanted to focus my remarks today particularly on the support that can be offered through schools to pupils if they are going through a period of bereavement. But responsibility for bereavement and support doesn't begin and end with the Department for Education. However, within England, numerous Whitehall departments are crucial to this, and many have been mentioned in the debate today. The Department for Work and Pensions, the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice, the Department for Housing and Local Communities, the Department for Health and Social Care, and the first 3 that I named, the Department for Work and Pensions, the Home Office and the Department for Health and Social Care, do continue to work together to address the recommendations from the UK Commission on bereavement. Bereavement is everyone's business. And the Commission's report put the spotlight firmly on bereavement and the gaps that there are in support and the impact that it can have on bereaved people. The Department for Health and Social Care in particular continue to lead the work on implementing the report's recommendations, and they also chair the cross-government bereavement working group, which the Department for Education also sits on, to improve bereavement support. And it's important that they do continue to look at the options of how we improve support for bereaved children and young people right across government, and including the issues around data collection and improving it, which I know has been one of the key asks in the debate today. But going back to schools, they do a brilliant job at supporting their students, including through difficult times. But school staff can't be expected to be experts in mental health. I know that teachers do a fantastic job in picking up on the needs of their students, in identifying when support might be needed. And that's why the Department for Education does provide a list of resources for schools on supporting mental health and well-being. That includes support from the Childhood Bereavement Network, Hope Again, and resources hosted on the Mentally Healthy Schools site for mental health leads, which will include supporting children dealing with loss and bereavement where that's needed. And our manifesto was clear that on the priority we place on improving mental health support for all children and young people, because we know that's key to helping young people achieve and thrive in education. We know we can do more to improve mental health support within schools and how crucial it is to breaking down the barriers to opportunity. And that's why we will provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school. We'll also be putting in place new Young Futures hubs, including access to mental health support workers, recruiting an additional 8,500 new mental health staff to treat both children and adults. And the department has already offered all state schools and colleges a grant to train a senior mental health lead by 2025 to help schools to develop an effective approach to mental health and well-being, and that will include for any child who is going through bereavement. I am really grateful as well to the member for Stevenage for the particular questions he asked in relation to the curriculum and potential legislation around that. I want to touch on relationship, sex and health education within schools because it really does have a vital role in supporting children and young people to look after their emotional and physical health and build supportive and successful relationships. What is taught as part of relationships and health education really helps children to prepare for a range of experience they will have during their lives, both happy and sad, through love and loss. And it's important that children and young people feel comfortable and see school as a safe place to talk about their feelings and to be able to identify where they might need support, know how to ask for it, and for schools to know where it can be found. It's vital that difficult issues like childhood bereavement are not shied away from. I think the honourable gentleman from South Shropshire put that incredibly powerfully through his own experience, that these are talked about and that teachers know about these common adverse childhood experiences that can include bereavement and understand how these might affect their pupils both whilst they're at school but also in the longer term if they don't go addressed. Through the mental wellbeing topic in health education, pupils are taught about a range of content, including on dealing with bereavement. It includes talking about recognising your emotions, assessing how you are feeling, and there are a whole range of external expertise and materials so that teachers can tailor their lessons accordingly. For example, from the Anna Freud Centre, they provide valuable support to children and young people dealing with loss and bereavement. But we are continuing to look for opportunities to improve the teaching of relationship, sex and health education in schools. We had a consultation that ended in July. That was under the previous government. We're currently reviewing the RSHE guidance, which sets out the content of what children and young people are taught. We really want to make sure that children's well-being is at the very heart of the guidance that the government offers. And so we're looking very carefully at these responses. We're consulting relevant evidence, we're talking to stakeholders, and we will be setting out next steps to take the RSHE guidance forward. And this debate will contribute to the thinking on that. Beyond schools, government is also committed to supporting families, including through the most difficult times. Family hubs do great work, helping families across vital services to improve health, education and well-being of children and young people and their families. And that has been mentioned a number of times today, that to support a child and young person is to support their family too. The 75 most deprived local authorities have received around £300 million from the Department for Education and the Department for Health and Social Care between 2022 and 2025 to set up family hubs with integrated Start for Life services. And following the October budget, we also confirmed an additional £69 million from the Department for Education to continue delivery of family hubs in 2025. Family hubs are really important because they offer a single access point for families. They reduce the stigma around accessing services because they provide a whole range of services, including parent and infant mental health. They have a focus on relationships and whole family working, and so they harness the power of networks and bring it together under one roof. They provide thousands of families access to support when they need it, and indeed that would include potential bereavement support where needed. All 75 local authorities have opened at least one family hub in their area. It creates a welcoming space for families with children aged 0 to 19 or 25 where they have a special educational need or disability. And it really is effective in bringing together a wide range of services for families, and there are now 400 of these family hubs across 75 local authorities. And it's important, though, that we do consider how to improve existing access for support for bereaved children when they need it and when their families have made that conscious decision to find that support for them. And the Cross-Government Bereavement Group is looking at how to better improve that access to support and those options of improving data collection as well. We are considering whether a legislative solution is the right approach, particularly making sure that there is the evidence base for that, and that it is the best way to support children and families, and that it wouldn't have any unintended consequences, because we do need to give consideration to any potential negative impact that collecting data at such a sensitive time may have, and I think all of those factors need to be considered. That's why the cross-government bereavement group will consider the existing roles and responsibilities of registrars in signposting support to bereaved children and their families. We'll continue to look at whether and how that could be improved, including potentially training and guidance for registrars. So many of the issues that have been outlined today are certainly part of the considerations. So I want to thank my honourable friend again for bringing the matter forward. Thank all those who have contributed to today's debate today. It does take great courage to be so candid about experiences of grief and loss. And although bereavement is something that we will all experience in our lives, we will all grieve in our own way. We have a role to play, though, in making sure that children and young people do get access to that support that they need, whether that's in school, whether it's outside of school, and that they get it when they need it as well. So I want to particularly thank all those who are working across education, across the health and care systems, across the charitable sector, in the interests of children and young people who experience bereavement and their families, and provide them that much needed support. Thank you.
Kevin Bonavia to wind up.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. And the motion before us today is that we have considered the petitions before us today. And I hope that everyone will agree that we have considered it well, and let us hope that there will be beneficial progress as a result of today's discussions. And I once again thank the petitioners. I also want to add my own thanks to everybody who has spoken in today's debate. This clearly has resonance across the whole House, across party as well. And we have, I think, learnt a lot from members' own personal experiences. We've heard from a member for South Shropshire of his own experience of child bereavement. We've also heard from the member for South Devon of the experience of a bereaved parent. And we've also heard from the member for Twickenham of the experience of children finding their friends losing their own parents. So these are all big personal experiences. And I wasn't going to mention my own personal experience, but hearing from others today, it reminded me of what happened 26 years ago when I lost my father when I was 20 to throat cancer. And at the time I had a younger brother in his teens and a mother as well who having to cope with the family. And it made me think, what if I've had the support that many people have today, and if that was there for everyone? So I'm grateful for people sharing those experiences. How many hundreds of thousands of experiences are there out there like out there today? I also want to thank other members, the Honourable Member for Walthamstow, for giving experiences that MPs get in our surgeries all the time, very harrowing ones, and we have to take them as best as we can, but also learning from those and thinking about how we can join things up. As she said, you know, the state, in all its forms, is a corporate parent. And then I'd also like to thank other members as well. We've had the member for Ashfield who spoke as well, and also the Shadow Minister, and I appreciate his cross-party approach to that. Finally, I want to thank the Minister herself for taking such an open mind to this and actually confirming the government will be taking what we've heard today in both those areas, in the cross-party working, in the cross-departmental working group, and also in her own department, taking that forward. So I will be monitoring that and will help the petitioners to do that. And finally, I want to thank the petitioners themselves. You have put this on the agenda. They have put this on the agenda, and we are all grateful for them doing so. And we, as members, will do what we can